This is the live stream I've really been waiting for.
So we've done a lot of work to try to make naval gameplay much more important.
And so as the first age comes to an end and the second begins, the exploration age, take a look at what Firaxis revealed for Civilization 7 today. New commanders, treasure fleets, a whole load of naval gameplay information. Let's get into it. We start by talking about the oceans themselves, the high seas, new tile types, dangers, and everything else that's introduced with the exploration age. And while we admire this natural wonder and its wonderful yields, I'm actually going to hand you over to Firaxis, the developers, to introduce deep sea tiles and the new mechanics.
Okay, so we're looking at our cogs. They are still in shallow water along the coast, but there's some darker blue deep water just ahead of them. Then when you hit any type of obstacle that is turn ending, your movement is stopped. And at the beginning of the exploration age, ocean is treated the same way. Ocean is turn ending terrain. It's also dangerous, and every turn you end in the ocean, you take some damage.
Ouch.
So there are a few things to unpack there. The first one is obviously that coastal tiles return as being roughly navigable in the first age. However, you'll need to get to the second age and the technologies that it offers to unlock, to access the rest of the map. And as you can see in this clip, even when you do, your ships may still take damage for being in the rough seas. Around 11 damage at the moment, so you can actually afford to sort of brute force it a while and reach out and try and find the distant lands. And this is again, somewhat familiar mechanic, but reinforced and strengthened in Civilization 7. Take it over, Firaxis.
How do distant lands work with different map types?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really fun question. So, depending upon which map type you select, either the distant lands is going to be sort of a carbon copy of your homeland area, or it's going to be entirely different. So in this particular case, the Terra Incognita map
was selected, which gives a nice large continent to begin with, and the distant lands are highly variable and very different than your homeland. We have other types. It's called Continents Plus, where it'll look like this, and you know that the distant land area is also going to look similar. We have an archipelago map type, where your homeland is a bunch of islands, sort of think of Indonesia in real world, and the distant lands is also a bunch of islands. So everyone's playing on sort of the same type of playing field, but it's very, very different than what we're seeing here in this game.
I love that map.
I love that map too, and I also quite like the fact that it sounds like this will be deeply ingrained in the game. It doesn't seem to matter too much what map type you're playing, the distant lands will always somewhat feature. And of course that's tied to continents, which are built into the map, and the technologies that you unlock, maybe master by researching them twice. The technologies that you just saw, as well as these ones on your screen, are pivotal to developing our cities around naval empires as well, and they stress that the key to really harnessing those resources is to lean in, to build either towns, to grab them, or cities on these new distant lands, these new islands. And as you can see, the rewards are actually fairly generous, a lot of them around coastal terrain, money, or food, as you might expect. And later in the video, we'll discuss some brand new civilizations that can make the most of that, just like a canal city could make the most of it here in this specific location. The sea also presents some dangers though, as they alluded to in an earlier clip, and Civilization 7's narrative events largely drive this. Generally, you'll be given two options. Sometimes there'll be negative ones. A lot of the time though, from what we've seen, it'll be two positive boosts, and you have to choose which one you'd like to keep. From the ones that we saw in the live stream, some of the ones you've seen on screen, some of these benefits are very strong. And that's not the only new benefit coming to Civilization 7's ocean gameplay, so let's look at that now. Naval gameplay, the new mechanics, and those treasure fleets. We start with the new mechanic. I'm going to hand over to the developers at Firaxis again to explain how coastal tiles are now a benefit to counteract some of those dangers.
Any of these exploration age ships can stop on a coastal tile and spend a whole turn there refitting, cutting down some more trees and patching up their sides of the ship where it's taken damage, getting some new tar and pitch to fill in those holes that they might have accumulated that are leaking, and so you can actually heal as you're moving across.
There you go. You can now heal as you're exploring these gorgeous lands in neutral coastal tiles with any Exploration Age ship by the sounds of things. Speaking of these lands, take a look at these. What are perhaps treasure resources? Exotic resources from those distant lands that will not only reward cities but also fuel the new Exploration Age mechanic, those treasure ships. Take a listen. Over to you, Ed.
But the most important resources are those ones that are so exotic, they're greatly desired back at home, and we can cash them in for amazing profits when we get them back home. And those resources, we'll see some examples of them, are what we call treasure resources. And when you settle near a treasure resource and set up a settlement there that has all the naval facilities, the docks and stuff that it needs, and you get to the shipbuilding technology, which is about halfway through the technology tree, all of a sudden you start to produce treasure fleets. And treasure fleets are units that are generated automatically by these settlements, have to be protected on their way home, but if you get them home, you can cash them in for points towards this legacy points and just gold that you can spend on whatever.
So there you have it. These fleets will be automatically generated in our treasure-filled settlements. That, by the way, is confirmed twice throughout the live stream. The game will automatically generate these ships based on a certain number of turns or what have you, but they must be manually controlled. And they tie in with what you've seen on your screen for about the last minute or so. This economic milestone, this goal, the victory conditions, quote unquote, for the second age, of course, of 3 in Civilization 7. Now, this one, the economic one, as well as this one, the military one, are both deeply tied to naval gameplay. The military one, actually not so much about the economy and those resources, but instead about grabbing the required technologies, going across the deep ocean, and probably hoovering up some new land, bonus points for distant land territories. Focusing back in on those exotic treasure resources though, it's about connecting those. Gain 30 treasure fleet points. So not the resources themselves, but those treasure ships. And here's one now. Once those are generated and you safely bring them back, you will receive those points, those treasure fleet points. Those points will work toward that economic victory, those objectives, milestones that will ultimately reward you in the next age, whether it be through extra leader attributes or city, civilization-wide benefits. The more of these objectives you can achieve, the more points you will get. Finally, after some technical difficulties throughout today's reveal live stream for the Exploration Age, they also showed us some actual naval combat, the real bones of the gameplay. Again, it was fairly brief. This is literally all of it that you're going to see before we move to the next section, and most of it is what you might expect, repeating largely that Civilization turn-based formula, but perhaps with maybe better animations and ginormous ships. Speaking of which, the largest ship of all, the Naval Commander. This is the second type of commander to accompany the new military army commander. It's the first time they've talked about it today as well. The Naval Commander is introduced in the Exploration Age and carries with it a very similar structure and also at least initial benefit to the Army Commander. This Fleet Commander can hoover up nearby units. Also important to note, they teased this Great Person, which is unique to the Spanish recently announced civilization. More on that in a moment, but the Great Person, alongside loads of other things within the city, leader attributes, gives the naval units that we're seeing here a little bit of a buff. In this case, quite a bit of a buff, actually, with 2 extra movement on top of the base 3. Promotions return, of course, but this Assemble Army, or Assemble Fleet, probably is the best move. Removing a whole load of micromanagement, potentially, of course, allowing you to spring a surprise attack on an enemy. Whatever your benefit that you see out of this is just a great thing, I believe, to see another commander, as we probably expected in the second combat domain, the domain of the Exploration Age. The ships are pretty big. Pretty big. They kind of barely fit within a tile, and you can see that here alongside the same structure that the Army Commander has, but of course with different benefits this time for the Fleet Commander. The way this works is you build up experience generally, there may be other ways, but generally it'll be by engaging in combat, being near combat, to get these points, and you can assign points based on your experience to get benefits, like +2 unit slots within your commander, Or on the bombardment side, extra combat strength for naval units within the radius of the commander while they're fighting land, which is pretty cool. +1 ranged attack distance for naval units. That in of itself seems super strong. Down in the second tier of bombardment, you'll have to work your way there. And finally at the bottom, gunfire support. Naval units will deal splash damage if they're within the radius of the commander. Units adjacent to your target will take 50% of the total damage. That is very strong because, of course, the commander has this radius, right? This area of effect, essentially. And if your units are within it, they'll all get this benefit. Am I overstating it? I don't think so. I think that's just really insane. And adding to that, once you complete one of the trees, like the bombardment tree, you can unlock a commendation point. In this case, they've unlocked duty, an ability for the fleet commander that gives them what they call heroic assault, basically a one-off direct damage to a unit. This does not trigger a fight, by the way, it's just damage. You won't receive any in exchange, you just shoot them and deal damage to them, bombard them. Seems very good, it's on a cooldown. There was a little bit of debate on stream whether it cooled down every turn or a bit longer. Like a lot of things, of course, it's still subject to change and still early days. But these fleet commanders look so good for naval combat. And complementing them, we have some new leaders and civilizations that were just announced. Hard announced or soft announced, if you were paying attention or listening. Isabella was the main announcement, and along with her, the Spanish civilization in the exploration age. Of course, you don't have to play them both together. Isabella is a leader separately, and you'll play as her throughout the entire game, whereas Spain will be age specific. Another thing that they soft announced on the Civ selection screen as we were moving through from the first stage to the second was Mexico. On the right hand side there you can see that this will unlock Mexico in the modern age if we move through to play as Spain. So Spain is one of the possible precursors. They also explained this, in my opinion, kind of confused UI where the two ticks are in the middle there. If you play as Greece or as Isabella, you will be able to play as Spain. That's what that's saying. You met one of the conditions out of 3, in fact, 2 of the conditions. Moving on though to Isabella. She is an expansionist and an economic-focused leader. She has a starting bias of the coastline, which makes perfect sense for what we've been talking about. And returning from Civ 5, she doesn't really like leaders with natural wonders. She's a natural wonder gal, speaking of which 300 gold whenever she discovers one, and double that if it's in one of those distant lands that we were talking about earlier. And you'll be able to use that gold to purchase naval units with a plus 50% discount towards purchasing them and -1 maintenance on them across the board. Seems like a juicy leader, heavily inspired, as they mentioned on stream, by the leader Isabella from Civilization 5. Speaking of leaders and civilizations, also Mongolia had a specific point about it highlighted. Another exploration age Civ recently-ish revealed. Their condition for this military objective victory pathway is just a little bit different than everybody else's. They're of course not really going to be a naval power, but feature in the exploration age. And to address this, the developers have decided that they can also conquer cities and settlements in their homelands, not just settlements in distant lands. That's a nice touch, unique to the Mongols, of course, historically. If you're familiar, then that will make perfect sense. And also, to me, highlighted another way how specialization can be buried right down into the little details of victory conditions and also these unique civics, unique to each civilization. What's not unique to each civilization will be the things that you build, and of note they mentioned that bridges and other ways to turn water tiles into this sort of new framing for tiles or districts, urban, is possible. Again, like those bridges and other ways that they alluded to help you expand out from your city centre, because as a reminder, city tiles must grow out contiguously. They must be attached. And so you can use tiles like these ones here, where navigable rivers reach cities, lagoons, lakes, whatever, all flowing in together. Look at that beautiful display of tiles. Well, you can utilize that to your advantage and build urban buildings around those to connect to a larger city. And that's just one example of what I'm going to talk about in my next video. Thank you so much for joining me in this one. I wanted to get this out quickly because it is exciting news, but also as a focused piece. So much of what they talked about in this live stream, that I will of course link below, was about Navy, the naval gameplay, but it was quite disjointed throughout the some 2-hour live stream. So I wanted to pull it all together and give you one place you could come to see this wonderful set of changes. In my second video, the sister video to this one, I'll cover off the rest of the exciting things. Namely, religion. Lots of stuff about faith, as well as some city district stuff and some other little gems in there. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be working on it as we speak if it's not already linked down below. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.